Andy Burke of BBC Radio Scotland joins us. Andy, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, lads. How are you?
This could have been a massive game for Scotland if we're in exactly the same situation. If only we hadn't had a sending off against Wales, the whole season would be different. But for you guys, a win in Twickenham gets completely ruined by the fact that you just couldn't back it up the next week. So what should have been looking forward to a triple crown for you guys, all of a sudden is like, geez, we've got to win this game now.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. As you say, the win at Twickenham came probably unexpectedly, given that we hadn't won there for 38 years. So to get off to the best possible start, and then you're looking at Wales, as I'm sure Ireland did in the opening weekend, and you felt it maybe wasn't a vintage Wales side, and then you go 17-3 up and you think you've got them exactly where you want them. To let them off the hook was hugely frustrating from a Scotland perspective. And you said it there at the top, backing it up has been Scotland's problem over the years. They've been an on-their-day team. They can turn over anyone when they get it right, but just going and doing it week after week and putting that together in the space of a single championship is still the big doubt that surrounds this team.
They've clearly got all the constituent parts, as you say, on the day to do it. What is preventing them from being consistent over a period of time, and not just one game, but over a tournament like this, for example?
I think it's. I think a lot of it's still a little mental challenge to get over. I think they seem to be building, and I think they are building in the right direction. But I think that Wales game encapsulated a lot. The way Wales hung in the fight, were never beaten, and when Scotland let them off the hook, found a way to get it done despite not playing particularly well in that game. And I think it's just that know-how, that streetwise ability to win when perhaps you don't really deserve to. I think Scotland are still lacking in that department somewhat. They've made huge strides in many areas of their game. Their scrum has improved out of sight. Their set piece generally has improved. Their defence has proved beyond recognition since the World Cup. But I think there's still just that little bit of know-how on how to get over the line. And as you say, backing up one big win, that's the sign of a team of real contenders. And that's maybe the area that Scotland are still just lacking a little bit at the moment.
Andy, we were speaking yesterday about a lot of the stuff that's been written and said about Scotland down through the years. How much does that seep into the mentality of the players, that there is a siege mentality somewhat, what something like Eddie O'Sullivan would have said about them, for example, at the end of last year?
Well, I know they're aware of it. We had Stuart Hogg on our podcast a few weeks back, and I know he was aware of it. I think they get frustrated. I think it annoys them. But I think there's a realisation there that until you can shut these critics up with your results, then they leave themselves open to it. And I think, you know, Ireland's record in particular against Scotland is incredible. You know, Scotland have won just once in their last 10 attempts against Ireland. They finished above them in the Six Nations just once in the Six Nations era. So with that sort of record, you leave yourself open to those sort of criticisms. And I get a little uncomfortable. I remember Ronan O'Gara making similar comments ahead of the 2017 game, which worked out not too badly because that was the one that Scotland came out on the right side of. But I think until you can reverse that on the pitch, then, you know, if you leave people a reason to criticise, then they're going to take it. Eddie O'Sullivan, perhaps more than most, would be inclined to get stuck in, I would suggest. But reading some comments this week from some of the ex-Ireland guys, we spoke to Rory Best earlier in the week, I think there is a respect for Scotland there. And I think one of the reasons that Ireland's record is so good is that they do have a respect for Scotland and wouldn't fall into the trap that perhaps England have done in recent years of underestimating Scotland. They know these guys well from the Pro 14. They know their individual qualities, and they know, as we said, on their day, if Scotland get it right, they are a tough proposition. So I think that's been a big strength of Ireland over the last few years, that they haven't fallen into the trap of underestimating Scotland, but actually giving them the respect they deserve, and that's why they're able to produce such good performances against them.
How tough were the questions within Scotland when you see all that stuff coming from outside? Is it just preserve of Irish pundits to slate Scotland, or is there a lot of challenging going on inside the country as well?
I think certainly in the wake of the World Cup, there was some serious questions asked. That tournament in Japan, they just got it so wrong. That opening game against Ireland could barely have gone worse for Scotland. And then obviously been knocked out in the pool stage is failure in anyone's language. So in the wake of the World Cup, there was a lot of tough questions asked of Gregor Townsend, of his players. Were these guys up to it? And then, of course, the Six Nations, the 2026 Nations, you had the Finn Russell saga, and Scotland really seemed to be in a bad spot at that stage. Gregor Townsend seemed to be in a bad spot. But I think what we saw from them in that Six Nations, while they didn't, of course, get themselves into championship contention, we saw a bit more of that steel and a bit more of that recognition from Scotland that you're not going to be able to win on a consistent basis playing this otherworldly, on the edge, attacking rugby. You need the basics, you need your set piece, you need your defence to be on top. And Scotland have addressed that. They're not the finished article, but over the past year or so, we've seen them becoming a steelier proposition. So with that, the questions are still being asked, but I think there's a recognition that Gregor Townsend, and let's not forget, he made significant changes to his coaching staff after the World Cup, which was a bold move. I think there's a recognition within the Scottish media and the Scottish fans that they've made moves in the right direction. Now, there's clearly, as the Wales game demonstrated, a way to go. But if you compare where they are now from where they were post-World Cup, I think there's been great strides there.
The way the World Cup went in most countries, the head coach would have ended up being a sacrificial lamb. How did he manage to survive? Was that part of, was changing the coaching ticket part of the deal to, look, we'll try something new? And did he just have enough in the bank that would suggest, look, there's no other alternatives out there, there's no silver bullet to this, it's going to be a long out road back? And like, how did he convince everybody that he was the man to do it?
Well, firstly, the SRU had taken not a gamble, but really the move to replace Vern Cotter was a big call, because when Vern Cotter came in, he restored Scotland as a credible force. You'll remember before Vern arrived, Scotland weren't even an on their day team. They were pretty hopeless, let's be honest. And from the 2015 World Cup, Vern started building things, and Scotland started to pick off big results against Ireland, against Wales, against France, teams they just hadn't had a sniff at for quite a few years. So to replace Vern halfway through a World Cup cycle was a big call from the SRU, and Vern wanted to take Scotland through to the 2019 World Cup. So to bring in Gregor at that stage, Mark Dodson had put all his chips on Gregor Townsend, so it would have taken a lot for him to replace him. But I don't know if the discussions went very far in terms of replacing him. I don't think they did. I think Mark Dodson was convinced that Gregor was still the man. But I think Gregor himself realised in terms of the coaching that things weren't quite right. And hearing people around him close to the coaching team during that World Cup, I don't think the dynamic was right. I don't think his assistants were being heard as much as they would have liked. I don't think their input was as great as they would have liked. And Gregor is a very strong character and had very clear ideas on how he wanted the game to be played. And now you could say if his assistants weren't making themselves heard and weren't having the influence that they should have done, then that's just as much on them as it is on Gregor. So the dynamic wasn't quite right. They were good coaches, but I don't think the chemistry was quite what it should have been, or perhaps once had been. So it was Gregor, I think, that was the driving force in identifying, right, I need some new voices in here, some new ideas. And the guys that he's brought in have had a fantastic effect. Peter de Villiers on the scrum has just reinvented that Scotland scrum to the point where what was once a weakness is now a strength. John Dalziel has come in, promoted from within, and has got the pack of forwards playing really, really well. And Steve Tandy's probably the standout, isn't he, in terms of defence? The Scotland defence was incredibly leaky over the years. Really, you were looking at Scotland having to score 5 tries to cancel out the opponent's 4 if they were going to win a game. Now they've got the stingiest defence, or certainly did in the last 6 Nations. So the moves that he made have paid off, but there's still plenty of room for improvement, certainly.
Can I ask you what the perception is of France in particular with the way the whole postponement was handled and their investigation into who patient 0 was? I mean, I hate to stereotype, but look, it's the 6 Nations, that's the whole point of this, right? It was so typically French to look down their noses at the rest of us and insist that this tournament was only going to go ahead because they have the best protocols and they were going to make sure that we all followed their protocols, and then they're the ones who break the protocols. So, you know, it doesn't affect us anyway as badly as it has affected you guys. It kind of, I mean, we played their best team, but surely people in Scotland are tearing their hair out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of frustration at that. I think initially it looked like, Scotland might get an opportunity to take on a weakened France team, which, given our record in Paris, might have been no bad thing. But clearly things progressed and that didn't happen. I think what has been said publicly and what has been said privately are 2 different matters. I think there's a lot of anger in the Scotland camp about the way France have gone about this, because they have been meticulous in the way that they have planned and followed the protocols to try and minimise the risk to their team and as you say, to the tournament in general. So to see the French team seemingly so casual with the rules is a massive frustration. And I think there's a bit of mixed feelings amongst the Scottish rugby public. On the one hand, you would say if justice was to be done, Scotland should be awarded that game and awarded the victory. But it would be the most hollow of victories, wouldn't it? And I think it's important for Scotland, and Gregor Townsend would say the same. I think this test is important for Scotland, and they want this game played to go and test themselves against France, to go and see if they can put another long winless away run to bed like they've done at Twickenham, like they've done down in Wales, albeit in empty stadiums. But these were records that desperately needed to end. But I just wonder, in the grand scheme of things, if this postponement might not work in Scotland's favour anyway, just given the nature of the Wales game. It gives them a bit of time to get over it. It was such a gut-wrenching way to lose. You've now got back-to-back home games. Obviously, Sunday will be a tough game. Then you've got Italy, but you've got a chance to regain a little bit of momentum. If you can put together back-to-back wins, then suddenly you've got a chance going to Paris still in title contention, which is something that Scotland haven't done in the longest time.
Andy, what do you think of Ireland? What's the general consensus amongst you and your colleagues about where we are at the moment? Because obviously we're going through what it shouldn't be a transition period, but anytime a new coach comes in, the players haven't transitioned much, but the results are kind of transitioning.
Yeah, and I think, I think when you follow someone who's been around as long and was as successful as Joe Schmidt, then that transitional phase is inevitable. And I think that's the view of Ireland at the moment. In Scotland is, yes, maybe they're not the well-oiled machine that they were at the height of the Joe Schmidt era, but there's still plenty of players that contributed massively to that success that are still there and still capable. And you look at their key guys, Johnny Sexton, he's maybe not at the best time in the last couple of seasons, but all of a sudden a Lions year comes around and he looks to be stepping it up a bit more again. And there's no way that any Scotland fan would allow themselves to think that Ireland are vulnerable, purely because, as I said about Wales earlier, they've just got that ability to, in a tight game, to get themselves over the line. And obviously the most recent meeting between the sides in December, the first half was pretty tight. The second half, Ireland won with a bit to spare. So I think I look at them and I see an Ireland team that are looking to shift away a little bit from what we know of them in recent years, that kicking game, that territory game. I think they're looking to put a little bit more width on the ball, and when you transition into that type of game, that's always going to take a bit of time. But seeing them against Italy, it looked like there were signs they were starting to put it together, albeit against limited opposition. But I think they remain a hugely dangerous side, and I don't think anyone in Scotland will be going in expecting anything other than a really tough, tight game at the weekend.
Is there confidence that this summer, Andy, Scotland don't get overlooked when it comes to the Lions? Because that has been the relationship between you and the Lions for quite some time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been the recent tours that the relationship between Scotland and the Lions has diminished to the point of you've now got a generation of Scotland fans who have no real connection with the Lions. They don't see their heroes, certainly when it comes to the Test series, they don't see their Scottish heroes involved, and there's no real buy-in for them. So, I mean, guys like me that grew up with the 97 and certainly the 97 tour where Scots had a huge influence. I love the Lions. It is one of my favourite aspects of international rugby, but a lot of guys haven't got that sort of thing to cling on to. So in terms of this summer, I think Sunday is a huge game in that Lions context. It's a huge game for both teams in terms of where their Six Nations goes. If Ireland lose, then that's 1 from 4, and that's a bit of a disaster by Irish standards. If Scotland lose, then it's looking like another one of those Six Nations that just starts to get away from them. And Warren Gatland probably isn't going to be cherry-picking too many players from a team that finishes 4th or 5th in the Championship. So that goes for both Scotland and Ireland on the weekend. I would like to think there's more guys that are putting their hands up, certainly in the pack of forwards. I think the tight 5, there's more guys there that you could see in that red jersey. Rory Sutherland in the front row, I think, is got a real shot. Xander Fagerson's ban has probably damaged his chances, but you would like to think Warren Gatland knows what he could do. Johnny Gray seems to have gone to a new level since he's been at Exeter. And then you look at the back row guys. Hamish Watson, if he doesn't go, I think there's something far wrong. I think he was unlucky 4 years ago. And I think Jamie Ritchie is looking like a real class act as well. And then in the backs, Finn Russell, Stuart Hogg, a couple others, you would hope those guys have a chance. So I think there are plenty of candidates that are capable, in my eyes, of stepping up and becoming Lions. But I think a lot depends on how these next 2 or 3 weeks pan out, because Warren Gatland will want some guys bouncing into that Lions camp coming off a really strong Six Nations.
And of course, Andy, we need to think about the greater good here, because ministers at Westminster think that this could save the union, that with Scottish independence back on the table, it's important for this Lions tour to happen. So it's vital, really, that Scotland get a good representation here.
I can't imagine anyone in the rugby world couching it in those terms, to be honest. And I can't imagine too many of the players or coaches who are going to be involved or thinking about it in those terms. Look, every major sporting event, politicians will cling on to for dear life. But I think in terms of your motivation for making a Lions tour and being any part of it, I can't imagine it's uppermost in these guys' minds when they take the field on Six Nations weekend.
Andy, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us today. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. All the best.